Thank you. Sorry about the delay, guys. Good afternoon. I'm Councilman Robert Stokes, Senior Chairman of Education, Workforce, and Youth Committee. Also in attendance is President Nick Mosby. Committee members are Councilman Bullock from the 9th District, Councilman Glover from the 13th District, Councilwoman Middleton, Vice President Councilwoman Middleton from the 6th District, Councilwoman Porter from the 10th District, Councilman Torrance said he will be on Lady at prior commitment. And Councilman Cohen also. Also in attendance from President Mosby's office is Nikki Thompson. From the mayor's office, I see Nina Thimlis. Also, the great staff person here, Margaret Kern also. I'm gonna have an opening statement. Students in Baltimore City were struggling with education before the pandemic, before COVID devastated our city. Children and families were surrounded by poverty and crippling effects of disinvestment on every level. A strong educational foundation is vital to meet life's challenges, and we send our children to school to learn. However, according to the Maryland State Department of Education reports, Baltimore City failed to meet the target for academic achievement in elementary, middle, and high school during the 2018 and 2019 school year. There are 79,000 students in the city schools. About 60,000 of those students are Black. Therefore, failing short of any education goal becomes a question of equity. I will be holding quarterly education workforce and youth committee hearings with the school system to allow greater opportunities for dialogue with the council and ensure our students and families are being served effectively. Today's hearing is to learn the CEO's overall plan to improve school performance. Before I hand this off to Commissioner Richardson for introductions, President Mosby, would you like to speak?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much. First and foremost, thank you everyone to this hearing. I'm excited to know that, Mr. Chair, you've decided to turn this into a quarterly briefing with the school system, very similar to what we do from a public safety perspective in the police department. Before we get into this hearing to talk about school performance and provide the CEO as well as school staff the opportunity to talk about the things that have happened in the past, but also the things that they've put in place to move our school system in the future. We all know coming out of COVID-19, this has been a very trying time for us all. But more importantly for our young folks, because they're the most vulnerable individuals inside of this equation. And one of the key elements that provide some level of structure to our young folks is the school system. Unfortunately, children were out of school for almost a year and a half, and we recently got them back into the school system. Well, the unconventional methods that had to be used to ensure that we were connecting our young folks to educational opportunities and ensuring that we were trying to keep them on the right path, and if they fell astray, providing a path for them to get back on. There were some exceptional individuals of the Baltimore City Public School System that I wanted to highlight and mention. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to deliver City Council citations, resolutions to several individuals, and two individuals I ran into I'm going to highlight really quickly right now. The first is the Director of Student Transportation. That's Ms. Jacinta Hughes. Ms. Hughes is the Director, again, of the Office of Student Transportation. During her 4-year tenure, Ms. Hughes has revamped the department to operate more effectively and efficiently during the pandemic. Ms. Hughes' team supported the district's first in-person learning with yellow bus drivers, both driving students to school as well as providing classroom support in the district's student learning centers. During the past summer, Ms. Hughes supported back-to-school efforts using a yellow bus to market the district schools in neighborhoods. Ms. Hughes uses innovative strategies to address the national bus driver shortage, including purchasing white vans to support and supplement drivers, holding numerous job fairs, and leading a district-wide Bell schedule review. She also negotiated with taxi vendors and worked many late hours and weekends reviewing bus routing systems to ensure students get to school as quickly as possible. She's communicated this to not only students, but also families who receive transportation due to capacity challenges. Ms. Hughes leads from her seat and is always thinking through solutions to expedite getting our students to and from school, and we understand and know how important it is. The next person I would like to highlight that I had a chance to meet yesterday was Mr. Brandon Tillman. He's the Director of Enrollment, Choice, and Transfers. Brandon leads the Enrollment, Choice, and Transfers team to provide high-level customer service to our students and families. In a year like the one where enrollment services have perhaps never been more critical, Brandon solves family concerns quickly with a great demonstration of care and respect for all families he touches. He and his team work late in every phase of the capacity to finalize enrollments and transfers so students can attend new schools. He's a great partner and colleague, working with IT to stand up the online enrollment system, working with early learning to support pre-K and K enrollment, as well as advertising and outreach for families with several offices across the district to reimage our ECT office. More than anything, Brandon is in the service of families and treating them with respect and care. He solves problems before they develop. From students to parents to grandparents, Brandon artfully and respectfully helps families navigate enrollment process to meet students' needs. The next person I would like to highlight is the Maryland Principal of the Year right here in the city of Baltimore at Digital Harbor High School, Ms. Tarsha Swinton Buck. This week, the principal was highlighted on NBC's Today Show. Ms. Buck, who is in her third year at Digital Harbor, again, was named Principal of the Year in 2021. It's only been 3 years since she's been at Baltimore's Digital High School, but at that time, she's devoted herself to bonding with the students via social media, leading by example on campus, and making record-setting impacts in attendance, grade averages, and graduation rates. Dr. Swinton Buck has created a robust and vibrant positive behavioral interventions and support system at Digital Harbor. Suspensions have decreased and attendance has increased. The backbone of this system is the connection before content, from greeting all students at the front door every single day to attending sporting events and including students in her TikTok feed. Ms. Dr. Swinton Buck has worked incredibly hard to develop relationships with all of her students. Next up, the 2021 Baltimore City Teacher of the Year. That's Sydney Thomas at Hollow Bird Academy. Sydney Thomas is a dynamic teacher who has taught 7th and 8th grade social studies students in English and earned the designation of a model teacher. This is reserved for the top-rated teachers in the city. Her commitment to racial equity and supporting students as they learn is exceptional. Her unwavering passion for the work is precisely what the students of Baltimore City need and deserve. Sydney teaches her students lessons that they can apply to their lives much beyond the classroom. Thomas is a Be More Me Fellow, meaning she develops and writes racially equitable and culturally responsive social studies curriculum for city schools. The 7th and 8th grade social study teacher also serves as a multi-classroom lead at Hollowbird Academy Equity Committee. On top of this all, earlier this month, we learned that Ms. Thomas was one of the 8 finalists in the state for being considered as Maryland Teacher of the Year. Sydney is a masterful teacher, and we are lucky to have her on our team here in the city of Baltimore. Next up, we have Miss Dale Staley. He's Dunbar coach, cross-country track and field. Coach Dale Staley is what you would call a true team player. He wants the best for his program, he wants the best for his kids, and he goes above and beyond to ensure that his team is ready on the field like the entire district should be. On many occasions, he has marked and cleaned the cross-country course on his personal time and using his own equipment without any thought of being compensated. Coach Staley's motto has always been, "It had to be done, so I did it." His dream was to hold a regional meet in the city. With his hard work and persistence, it happened. Dale wanted to make sure that the district was shown in good light. So he did what he needed to do to ensure Baltimore City Schools athletics was represented well. Coach Staley is a true representative of both the Dunbar athletic community as well as the district athletic programming. Coach Staley led the Dunbar boys track and field team to their first state championship in 2021. And then last but certainly not least, that's Dr. Rachel Pfeiffer, Ms. Laura Onahan, and Mr. Mavis Jackson. After a year when most students were virtual, Dr. Pfeiffer, Laura, and Mavis dropped everything to lead City Schools' efforts to provide summer credit recovery programs to students in a way that had never been done before. They pulled out every single stop to ensure all high schoolers, but especially our seniors, received the support that they needed. Rachel, Laura, and Mavis worked with individual school counselors to recruit students to be engaged this summer. They worked across the offices to collaborate the courses that needed to be offered for our young folks. They also established and designated senior sites for credit recovery, which allowed the dedicated staff to focus solely on getting students over the graduation finish line. In addition, in order to meet the needs of every type of learner, they provided the site with late start in order to accommodate student work schedules. Their recruitment efforts were successful, and they did a tremendous job to pivot quickly and add second summer courses and recruit more teachers with more students registered than were expected. Their laser focus on students meant City Schools engaged more students in the summer learning than we've ever seen before. More students were able to graduate as a result of the credits earned, and the summer that will be probably one of the most catastrophic times in our city schools history. Sorry about that. So again, we wanted to ensure that the folks that have been working to get our students back into school, connecting them with with the social emotional connectivity that they need with the schools, providing them and meeting their needs as they were. We wanted to ensure that we highlighted the individuals throughout the school system and just literally tip our hats off to them. A lot of times we hear the negativity about our school system, but a lot of these amazing stories kind of go under the rug, and I want to make sure that the City Council recognize them for their amazing work. We'll continue to do that throughout the school year, and we'd like to thank not only them, but the hundreds of employees that ensure that our young folks have an opportunity. Mr. Chair, before I turn it back to you, I know that we received a lot of information regarding this particular hearing and hearings in the future. I just want to note a point that not just this topic, not just this committee, not just this body of the City Council, but legislative decorum, when we have legislative hearings, it's for agencies, community folks, business, the administration to present to the council, but there is no opportunity for question and answer back and forth. I believe, Mr. Chair, you have the email addresses that you can provide to the general public if they have specific questions to either ask us or ask the school system or even the school board for a response. But this is an opportunity for the school system to share, again, some of the concerns that have been found through some of the reports, the internal investigation, as well as talk about things that are put in place from a systems perspective to move our city and our school system and our young folks in a new trajectory and in the right direction. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll yield the floor back to you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to briefly go over council rules. After the school system presentation, council members will have an opportunity to ask 2 questions each. Before moving on to public testimony, and we will repeat that cycle. Everyone's voice is important in this process. And while the public will be afforded the opportunity to voice and express their opinions, the council members will be the ones to engage in questions and answer sessions with school system. This to ensure the hearing proceeds timely and in an orderly fashion. Commissioner Richardson. Oh, let me recognize, I'm sorry, Councilwoman Odette Ramos from the 14th District and Councilman Conway from the 4th District.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Richardson, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me? Thank you, Chairman Stokes and all of the members of the Education, Workforce, and Youth Committee. I also would like to take this opportunity to formally recognize Mayor Scott, Council President Mosby, and Council Vice President Sharon Middleton. Council President Mosby, I would like to join you in thanking Chairman Stokes for his leadership in inviting the school system to quarterly conversations with the Education, Workforce, and Youth Committee. Thank you all for inviting the leadership of the school system to brief you on plans we have for improving and accelerating student performance in the current school year. I would like to also take this time to acknowledge my fellow board members. I'm not sure if they're here, but I want to acknowledge Commissioner McFadden. He's our vice chair. Commissioner Bondima, Commissioner Chinya, Commissioner James, Commissioner Reed, Commissioner Griffin, Commissioner Roberts, Commissioner Brooks, and our student commissioner, Horwitz. Thank you each for your support. Also with us this evening is Dewana Merritt-Starrett, the board's Director of Legislative and Government Affairs. As you all are aware, the pandemic caused everyone in the country to revisit the delivery of education. We had students that thrived in a virtual setting, but many that underperformed. Moreover, there were some that we simply could not reach on a consistent basis, despite our best attempts. Considering the very real and serious challenges we face during this major health crisis, our board charged the CEO with finding an innovative way to reopen schools and accelerate and promote student achievement. As we reflect on our journey this year, we remember the strides we took to educate young people in buildings in the spring and summer. We remember the boldness and audaciousness of our CEO to lead the charge of safely back in buildings, even when other districts in the state refused to decide, then ended up following her lead. We were national leaders around testing and vaccinations. As a result of all that early work, we had a better understanding of how to prepare to return to in-person learning. We have now reached what the CEO has described as a tipping point in education, both here in Baltimore City and across the country. We are tasked with educating students facing a set of challenges unlike any that impacted previous generations. The steps we took last school year were necessary, but the stakes are even higher as the pandemic continues. We are faced with students whose learning has been slowed and knocked off course through no fault of their own. They need us to be successful. Any less than success will profoundly impact thousands of lives. It's a challenge we understand and we will meet. That urgency is reflected in the newest version of the board's strategic priorities. Of those 7 priorities, the first is to ensure effective, relevant, and rigorous instruction. This call to action has increased importance as we take steps to help students recover the skills and lessons lost while they were away from brick and mortar schools. As the board was seeking to implement the strategies in this plan, the CEO and her team were active during the spring and summer to gather direct feedback about the return to in-person learning from parents, teachers, principals, community members, business leaders, and most importantly, from our students. Those voices informed the multi-year plan unveiled this fall to not only recover from the pandemic, but to chart the path forward to increase student success and the effectiveness of the school system. We call this plan Reconnect, Restore, Reimagine. The CEO and her team are here tonight and will share specifics of this multi-tiered and comprehensive effort. While there are several objectives within the plan, I personally am most excited about the personalized learning plans for each of our students designed to reiterate foundational skills and to accelerate any learning loss. We will offer tutoring to those that need it. Moreover, we will still maintain a virtual school for those students who have thrived in the virtual setting last year and desire to remain virtual. The Board of School Commissioners is excited about this new path and believe it meets the standards set in our priorities, as well as feedback from the community. I will end my remarks here so the CEO and her team can walk you all through R3 and its role in increased student achievement and organizational excellence. Thank you again.
Thank you, Chair Richardson. I just want to make sure, Chair Stokes, that I should proceed. Does that make sense? Great. Thank you, sir. Good evening. Thank you, Council President, for just your recognition of the hard work in the many sectors of our district and many members of our team. Chairman Stokes, I want to thank you for giving the school system the opportunity this evening. We will queue up a brief presentation to walk through because we know from past experience that our City Council members will have very important questions to ask, and we want to get to that. And then finally, I just want to thank Board Chair Richardson for her framing of the work that we do together, both as board and staff, to really set our schools on a trajectory of improvement. We know that a lot of the challenges we have faced are in many ways compounded over a number of years and were just made even more stark during the last 17 months of renewed, most recent racial unrest across the country, and most notably a once-in-a-generation health crisis. And so with that, we welcome the opportunity. And I don't know whether the PowerPoint tonight, I have staff with me who will be joining me in the presentation and will also be available to help answer any of our City Council members' questions this evening. I will also be joined in a very quick presentation by our Chief of Schools, Chief John Davis, and our Chief Academic Officer, Dr. Joan Dabrowski. But again, we have the full team here to really make sure that we walk through. So I don't know the best way to have the PowerPoint queued up for this run through. So you guys can let me know if I will see it and when it will be queued up. Do you see it yet on the screen?
Melissa, you are now the presenter. You can bring up the PowerPoint presentation. Thank you.
I also want to thank Melissa Broom, who is our legislative director, who has helped to really support bringing together tonight's presentation. So Melissa, just let me know when you're ready.
Looks like she's left the meeting. Should we wait till she comes back, or should I designate someone else to be the presenter?
Sure, let's see. I will look at participants and see who's here. Chief Perkins Cohen, if you're here, do you mind taking over from Melissa? There might have been something else that occurred that she got pushed out. Thank you, Allison.
Something's happening with her technology, so I just talked to Melissa. Let me see if I can. She said she sent me the PowerPoint. Hold on. See if I have it.
Marguerite, this is Melissa. I seem to be back in. If you can make me the presenter, I can share the PowerPoint.
Great, thank you, Melissa. And we can, as soon as you are ready, we can move to the first slide once you, great, thank you very much. As Council President Mosby framed this evening, we are here to specifically address the council resolution as outlined by Chair Stokes. So here you just have a reminder, and what we have done is really framed our presentation to directly address this council resolution. So what you'll see in our next slide in terms of how we're going to be framing our brief 10 to 12 minutes will really be around some key areas. First, clearly we know that the council may have questions in other areas, but these areas are the ones that we're highlighting. First, we'll give an overview of our health and safety, as well as what we know, our lessons from the summer, some of the work we've done to really help move our young people's learning, to get them back reconnected, give them additional learning opportunities to help make up some ground. And then we'll also highlight 3 particular elements within our 3R plan about restoring, reconnecting, and reimagining. We'll have a focus from Chief Davis around wellness, which really has been honing in on school culture and climate and prioritizing that as young people return to school, as well as personalized learning, as Chair Richardson referenced our student learning plans and how those are being developed and implemented to really facilitate two-way conversation and action planning with schools and families, and then looking ahead to actually highlight some of the additional supports. So without further ado, we'll get started. And what you'll see as we talk about health and safety, and as Chair Richardson referenced, we really have now for over a year really focused in on our commitment to implement really rigorous health and safety protocols, mitigation efforts that we've been updating, refining, revising as we get more information, learn more about the virus, and working hand in hand with our medical community. That includes our own Baltimore City Health Department, as well as many health advisors who have been with us throughout the last 17 plus months. So we have professionals from Johns Hopkins, University of Maryland, as well as Morgan State University, who have joined with us to really help guide us with their in-depth public health and medical knowledge. You'll see here the list of measures that we have in place currently. These are protocols that we built on really now almost over a year ago, as we really went forward with, and we're some of the first in the state and the country. I'll highlight asymptomatic testing. The work of Chief Perkins Cohen and her team really has still, even today, Baltimore City is probably the only or one of only a handful, but we were certainly the first in the state of Maryland to implement asymptomatic testing and that randomized yet inclusive symptomatic testing that began in earnest this week. We have had some supply issues that have been a bit challenging, but overall, one of the things we know is that city schools, again, that yes, there are some bobbles, but we actually are one of the few school districts in the country that have the level of testing and proactive testing. And so what that has led to is a positivity rate within our K-8 schools of 0.19%, which is actually lower than the positivity rate of 0.26% we had from March 1st through June 15th. You'll see that our testing in middle and high schools yielded a positivity rate of 0.42% during last week, and this is lower than the rate of 0.6 we had again even in the spring when we had less young people, March 1st through June 15th. And then here we just have for City Council and the public just a sampling of some of the recognition we've received for that major effort. We also have made great progress with regards to vaccinations and the support we've received from the city, from City Health and other organizations. Our teachers at last count were at about 88% fully vaccinated. Principals were at close to 95% fully vaccinated. So as we are implementing our vaccination mandate for staff and student athletes, I think the good news is that as a community, city schools has actually had large portion, overwhelming majority of our staff were already fully vaccinated and took advantage of our early efforts there. As we move into some of the lessons from summer, I think what's important to highlight here is that our families and our young people proved with their feet that they knew and were willing to take advantage of additional learning opportunities based on what we know a number of young people missed by not being in person, because we also know the overwhelming majority of young people do best in an in-person setting. As Chair Richardson noted, we are doing work in the virtual school space for those students who thrived. But as you'll see here, historically, we have served about 9,000 students in the summer. This year, we supported 17,000 students through district-wide programming. It would have been very easy to assume that because of our students' challenges, we would have had less young people coming out. And what our families and our children showed was that when we provide the opportunity, they come out. You'll also see that we honored, City Council President honored Mavis Jackson, Laura Ohanian, and Dr. Rachel Pfeiffer. They were very quick when they realized we had so many young people. They immediately added a second session of summer school. Our Baltimore City schools teachers stepped up, many of whom had not taught summer school before, and came out to really serve our young people. You'll see we had a 75% increase from last year, 120% increase from 2 summers ago, with 406 summer graduates. And then what you'll see is that we had a real emphasis on relationships, social emotional learning, and that really reinforced what I was hearing from a number of community leaders, across the summer. And by community leaders, I mean those people who have been taking care of our young people and our neighborhoods long before any of us were sitting in the seats we're sitting in now. And what they emphasized was the importance of attending to the social emotional needs of young people and reconnecting them with high quality relationships. So our summer learning strategy did pay off, and I'll now turn to Chief John Davis to talk a bit about how that has really led into our focus on culture, climate, and then Chief Dabrowski will talk about our personalized learning. So Chief Davis, I will hand it off to you.
Thank you, Dr. Santelises. Before we get into both culture and climate and then also student learning plans, what you see in front of you is really the framework for our 3R plan: reconnect, restore, reimagine. And before we get into it, I want to be super clear that since the start of the pandemic, our family engagement, our engagement work has produced about 178,000 touches with our community. And I use the word touches because many families gave us feedback on more than one occasion. But I want people to understand that what you're going to see here in the next 10 minutes is really an outgrowth of many discussions that really started at the beginning of the pandemic and accelerated a lot over the summer as we were putting the final touches to this. And you can see there are preconditions like health and safety that Dr. Santelises spoke about, connectivity. There are some overarching commitments around student voice, again, engagement that will not stop, equity, professional learning, and then there are key strategies. And while there's 5 key strategies, the 2 that we are going to pay the most attention to, and we've paid the most attention to start the year off well, is around wellness, school culture and climate, and personalized learning. Let's get into culture and climate. We started this work with our schools back in May, and there's really 9 different culture and climate domains. You can see the 4 of them there at the bottom, and 2 of them are domains that we expect all schools to really work on, which is the high quality stakeholder experience, and then also the nurturing relationships and well-being. We worked all summer to make sure that our principals were prepared and they understood these different domains, that they learned from each other. And I will tell you, on day 1, going out to schools, when I went out to Cherry Hill, right, their theme was Ubuntu, which is really around essential human values. And no matter what classroom you went into, that theme was resonating everywhere, no matter how the students were working in pairs, individually, in groups. And then when I went to Violetville, they talked about Ohana. Ohana meaning family, and family means no one gets left behind. And the point is that schools were intentional about their culture and climate because they knew starting off on day 1, they had to do things differently. It had to be a community, and you'll see that across the district. Let's keep going. They ended up having to make a culture and climate plan. We asked them to identify 3 to 5 goals. Again, the stakeholder experience and the nurturing relationships were 2 that we demanded that they focus on, but then they could focus on a few more, again, based on the engagement within their school. They did that. We've been giving them feedback and to make sure that what they've said in their plan continues. We'll continue to look at our progress on 30, 60, and 90-day checkpoints. And we've also provided $10,000 for each school to really implement the culture and climate plan. In the end, you can see what it looks like here, but every school's looks differently. Every school's got a different theme, different areas that they are focused on. But in the end, it's a lot about quality experiences and nurturing relationships that we know have to be there. Not only did schools plan for that, but across the district, what you're always going to see this year are advisories and morning meetings. And those are dedicated times to make sure that those relationships can continue, right? The morning meetings for pre-K to 8th grades will usually be about 20 minutes. Advisory will be 30 minutes. And then for 9th through 12th graders, there's a minimum of 45 minutes per week. Every week there's a different theme. You can see the themes at the bottom, and we start off with who am I, who are we, community connections, goal setting. Again, those relationships A lot of times in schools, every year, right, you start the year off with culture and climate, but this is something we know that's going to have to go out throughout the entire year. The advisories are one of our best ways to make sure that nurturing relationships continues. Let's keep going. And I'll turn it over to Chief Dabrowski as she'll talk about probably the second biggest area, which is student learning plans.
Thanks so much, Chief Davis. So as we've already heard, one of the cornerstones of our work as we've been bringing our students back for in-person learning is this idea of knowing our students as human beings. So this notion of personalized learning, and the way it's being thought about right now at this particular moment in our schools is through the development of student learning plans, or what we've been saying are SLPs. And so what we've done so far is over the summer, we worked with a core group of teachers and principals and central office leaders to develop a process for how we would get to know our students individually. And so we established, again, I'll show on the next slide, a really user-friendly form for how we could collect information. We trained all of our teachers on how to use this tool. And we thought about how this plan would work in alignment with some of the other important student plans that we have, such as IEPs or 504s. And so again, as we thought about this as being a really important moment for us to hone in on our students so that we can be ready for them as we plan for their academic recovery. And so as we're looking forward, we're so excited. Tomorrow is a Systemic PD Day here in city schools. And so the day is being dedicated to helping provide more time to complete our student learning plans for teachers to work together, to work with their colleagues, to work with parents and families to complete these. And then at our first parent-teacher conference in early October, this will be a foundational resource as part of that conversation. And so by the end of our Q1, we'll have a student learning plan for all of our students. So we're really excited about this very concrete way that personalized learning is coming to life in our schools. On the next slide, I want to go ahead and just talk to you a little bit about what's in a student learning plan. So there are 5 sections. The first part is a place where students are able to talk about who they are. And that's a really important piece for us to call out here, is hearing our student voices in these plans is the place where we're beginning. And we're hearing about the students also from their families. As Dr. Santalis messaged, this is a two-way space where we learn from parents because they know their children best. And so by being able to have that outreach, we're able to understand how their students are doing, how they're feeling about coming back for in-person schooling. How did things go for them when we were virtual for those many months? We know that students have hopes and dreams and interests and things that excite them about school and things that are hard for them. So the About Me section is a critical space as we think about developing a plan for students. We certainly know that the students will have some needs and areas that they'll need support. And so in part 2, we're going to dig in and really collect some important diagnostic data. So we'll look at literacy, we'll look at math. We may look at some of our other core content areas in the secondary area to really build a picture of students so that we know where their strengths are and where the gaps are that we need to hone in on. Once we think about those sort of inputs, we then need to think about what will be the supports and enrichments that students need as we plan for the rest of this school year and beyond. And so it's really important that the plan not just be, here are all the things that a student needs or has interest in. It's, okay, now what are we going to do? And so this section 3, is really the space where schools match what they've learned about students with what resources are available to support that learning. In part 4 of our plans, we talk about how can families support that student growth and that work outside of school. What at home can happen to support that learning? And so again, there's opportunities throughout the school year for that conversation between school and home to really strengthen the partnership. And then last but not least, on the section 5, we really look at this as being a support that's across the school with multiple adults participating in the process. So we capture that. Who's with us as we're developing this plan for students? I just wanted to share also one of the quotes from our Teacher of the Year, Sydney Thomas. It's great for us to just hear what teachers are saying. And one of the things that this intentional work about student learning plans allows is having that time to connect with families right at the beginning and have these opportunities for conversations. When we know our students through the lens of families and through the lens of hearing from the students' voices directly, we are better prepared to support them, that holistic space. So let's go to the next slide here. So where I can, I think the other space that really recognizes the importance is identifying key staff at every school who is going to help make sure that the student learning plans are living and breathing and are happening. So we've identified what we're calling the navigator, the person who really takes the lead or the core sort of space of helping make sure that plan gets completed. And then an ambassador, that person who works across schools and who works centrally to make sure that we're staying in touch about what's working well, what improvements we want to make, and how we want to make sure that if there's revisions that we're hearing from the field, we can do that. So again, identifying staff to make sure that this work lives and breathes and continues. We go to the next slide. I just want to really just, break it down and sort of what is the timeline for how this will all happen. So as I mentioned, at the end of the first quarter, we'll have a plan for every student, and we'll use those plans as we engage in parent-teacher conferences. In the middle of the year in March, we will be looking at those plans again. And again, that's another time where we have parent-teacher conferences, and we'll be updating them or making revisions. And then at the end of the year, we'll be using this time again to plan not only as a reflection of how things went for the year, but also planning forward. What have we learned about this student that we want to make sure the receiving student learns for the year ahead? So again, I just wanted to give just a little bit of that process. So as we think now about these student learning plans and the rich set of data that we're going to gather in this process, we know that that's going to lead to what's next, which are the additional supports that we have prioritized through the additional funding that we've received through the ESSER grants. And I think one of the things I want to call out first and foremost is our commitment to tutoring. We are thrilled that we will be able to expand our tutoring efforts so that every school will have a tutoring partner. And we're also very fortunate in the work that was done throughout the pandemic that we've gotten some really powerful lessons about how tutoring can work well. So we know that we have to have the certain size for the group. We know how often tutoring needs to happen. We know how to match students with the right tutoring program. So we also know that we have to be really careful of where scheduling is for when tutoring happens so that kids can be there because attendance matters. So again, all of this work around tutoring will be able to be informed by that student learning plan. And if it matches that student and those resources are in place, we can go ahead and move those things right along. Extended day is another exciting support that's going to begin in Q2. Again, this is for those students who will be best served with additional time to focus on their academic needs. So again, schools will be developing their plans for how that after school work will look, and if it will be focusing on literacy or math, or in some cases it will be both. So again, really excited about that. And then I want to highlight just briefly our commitment to acceleration, which is a very intentional shift away from what we traditionally think about as remediation. So again, if we think about this idea that we know students may have some gaps and who may be behind because of what happened over the last 18 months. And so a remediation model might suggest that a student who hasn't learned a grade level skill yet be placed into a group or be held back and focused on that remediation. And what we know from the research is that those students actually continue to fall further behind. They never catch up with their grade level peers. And so what we do know and what we are learning is a much more promising forward-thinking model called acceleration, where we focus very specifically on key skills that students will need to master grade level content. And we do laser-like focus on prerequisite teaching to ensure that they have what they need to hit grade level content. And again, we'll use things like tutoring and extended day experiences to get students ready to meet grade level so that we can always be thinking forward and not use a deficit model of remediation. I'm going to ask Chief Davis to jump in and talk about that last bullet point about expansion of school wellness and behavioral health supports.
Thank you, Dr. Dabrowski. Besides the social workers that a couple of years ago we guaranteed were in every single school, we're also expanding additional behavioral health supports, especially through something called ESBH, which is Expanded School Behavior Health Program. We have partners we work with, organizations that bring in additional clinicians, and they have already been doing small group work with students that we know need additional supports. They work in classrooms with teachers. They work with SST teams around attendance. So the clinicians that come in really do more than just work with students in a one-on-one setting. They work in groups. They've done a lot so far in these first 4 weeks, and we're working to get even 15 more schools signed up for this. And so we're doing everything we can to get more social workers and more clinicians with our students and with our schools, and to really figure out the students that we know need the supports. We'll continue to do this. I mean, I think one of the things that I also want to call out is this is just the beginning of the plan, right? We did a lot of work in the spring and the summer, but as you saw the different timelines that Dr. Dabrowski put out with the SLP, if we know we need to change and move in different areas, especially around the school behavioral health supports, we will do that. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. St. Elisis as we close this out.
I just want to thank you both for joining me and walking through this. And I will now turn it back over to Chairman Stokes because I know you want to get right into questions that City Council members may have. So thank you again to the full team, and I will turn it back to you, sir.
Thank you so much. Before we start, I'm asking all speakers and panelists to mute yourself when you're not speaking. Identify yourself before you speak. Speak slowly and clearly, and after you finish speaking, please mute yourself again until you're asked to speak. So I get the opportunity to ask the first two questions. Please, could you explain what factors are considered when defining school performance? I guess what, in layman's term, what is school performance?
So Chairman Stokes, there's actually a number of factors that go into school performance. One, we look at culture indicators. We look at, what's the kind of social, emotional health of young people using a variety of measures, some of those aligned to the state. And then there are academic measures. And as I think someone quoted, it might have been our principal of the year, that relationships, caring come before content, and both of them run side by side. So we also have academic indicators, some dictated by the state, others that we use internally. And really, as we look at schools and that combination of factors, we also this year, through the work of Chief High Hubbard and Chief Teresa Jones, we also had a good amount of surveys this year that kept us linked up to what the schooling experience felt like for families and for young people. And what we are looking at is really where's the trajectory of growth. We know that not all of our schools are where we want them to be, but we're looking at what's the trajectory of growth, what are the changes that need to be made, what is the growth after some of those changes are made, and how do we adjust along the way. So I would say there's a suite of different factors that we look at. It's not just a single score, but it really is a composite of what I've described, and we're benchmarking against what's the trajectory of progress of a particular school or a cluster of schools.
Okay, my second question, what is the process for setting performance goals? What is the city schools looking at when they determine what is important?
So when we're setting performance goals and targets, it's a combination of where is a school starting, where do we ultimately want that school to be, right? Because we want high achievement across the board. But it's also, again, what's the ground that we want to see and that we think is reasonable in a given period of time. Some folks know this as SMART goals, and all that means is that those goals are specific, they're measurable, they're attainable, meaning they might be stretch goals, but they're goals nonetheless. They're relevant and they are timely. So a combination of all those figures come together. We set those goals and targets, and we look at what we call those touch points along the way, formerly known as some formative assessments, but touch points along the way that we can use to guide and give us feedback along the way, not just waiting only or relying solely, say, on one test at the end of the school year. So there's a number of factors that go into that, and they're part of our school profiles. And when it comes to charter schools, as well as school performance reviews, that's another way that we look at schools in a more holistic way, and that all of those figures come in together when we're looking at where is a school and how's a school performing.
Okay, thank you. What I'm getting ready to do is I want to thank my colleagues, especially my two committee members. They're going to help chair this hearing. Councilman Bullock will be chairing right now. When he finishes, Councilwoman Porter will take over. So I wanted to just have Councilwoman and Vice President Council Sharon Middleton to have two questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Dr. Santelises, for your team and the work that you continue to do for our students in this city. And I really appreciate the segments that you, the PowerPoint segments that you kind of characterize to help with, I guess, the flow of questions. That's very helpful. And I'm listening to the first piece on the health and safety and the protocols and the things that you're doing with the mask mandate and so on. So my first question, and I don't know if you can explain this yet, because I know it's still kind of a work in progress, but when you have students, when you have households that have multiple students at the same school, say someone in the a child in the second grade and then one in the sixth grade, how, and one of those students is tested positive and they go home, and here you have that second grader that's not, but they go back home, and then they're still going, they're not quarantined, they're still going back and forth to school. Is there some, and then we have the parent that basically, you know, sometimes they'll call us. Do they report to North Avenue, or do they call the principal? It's kind of like confusion. If you can just kind of explain that process.
No, sure thing, Councilwoman. Thank you for that. And I'm going to ask Chief Perkins Cohen, who has come forward to actually take this question for you, because she has really led on our testing work. So Chief Perkins Cohen.
Sure. So thank you, Councilwoman. So when it comes to students in the same family, so you indicated if there's a family where one individual is positive and then there's a sibling, the sibling is considered a close contact because they're part of the same household. So they should be quarantining as well. So one of the questions, you know, we ask families to ask at home is there a member of their family who is COVID positive? And so if there is, then they are supposed to keep their child home from school. So both siblings, in the case that you laid out, would be quarantined in order to make sure we're preventing spread to other individuals at the school. And then your second question was about if you have a positive case, where does the school report it? Was that the question?
I guess they're kind of all the parents are confused of what to do with that child that's not positive. Who do they contact? Do they go? Do they have to stay home too? There's just some confusion in getting that information out.
Yeah. So again, if their sibling that they live with in their home is positive, then they're considered a close contact of the sibling who's positive, and so therefore they need to be quarantined as well. So they would be home as well, and they should report that to the school. Sometimes siblings may live together but go to different schools, so we would want to make sure that they told that to their school that the other child goes to as well.
Okay. And then my second question, in that second part where you we're going over the wellness, climate, and culture. Really appreciate all those wonderful new things that are coming to light, tutoring, the extended day. All of those things are very good in helping to form a better student. You haven't really meant, and I know these things all help the teacher. Is there something that you're actually doing for the quote unquote teacher themselves? Is there training for that teacher? How do we get great, wonderful, supportive teachers that are going to, the teacher is still in charge of that classroom. They're still the top leader. So what are you doing for the teacher themselves? You're bringing in all this extra work, but can you hone in on that teacher and how to keep their mental stability and, their physical health? To maintain and be the best teacher that they can be.
No, and I think it's a great question, Councilwoman, and it's one that we really have been, attending to throughout the pandemic. We've learned a lot from the feedback from our partners, from teachers themselves. It's one of the reasons why within professional development, we have actually added wellness components for the PD for teachers. And we also heard directly from teachers that the additional wellness, additional mental health supports that Chief Davis referenced actually are a great help. That's the exact kind of support they want, because what we've heard from teachers is, with all of the lesson planning I have, with all of the thinking about acceleration and community building in my classroom, I actually need the additional supports, right, within the school that's not going to pull me away from the rest of the class. And I was visiting a high school this week, and there was a young woman who had a family member who was killed. She herself was pregnant. She walked out of the room and she was frustrated. Well, her English teacher, right, could, that's going to put additional pressure on that student's English teacher, the class she was in, and it's the additional counseling support that can come behind and say, you know what, I've got this, someone with additional training to help. And I think that's why Chief Davis was describing the investments we're making in that behavioral health, because teachers have long said, and particularly teachers in school with large concentrations of students with need, that they can't do it all, and that's an additional stressor. And so that's why we're investing some of those federal dollars in expanding those teams. Chief Davis, was there something I missed that you might want to add?
I was just going to add that tomorrow is supposed to be a systemic professional development day, but in hearing from teachers, they need the time with their student learning plans. And again, this is a direct reflection of what we heard from teachers, to make sure that we give them the time so that they can give the students the individualized attention and create that plan and work with their families. I know there are schools that are creating the time for tomorrow where they will do that, where they will be speaking with families. And again, I think to the councilwoman's question, that's what we heard from teachers, and they need that time.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the teachers. I'll stop there, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilman Bullock will be sharing from here, and I guess he'll answer your questions also.
All right. Well, again, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, City Schools team. Thank you, Dr. Santelises. I did want to, as always, thank you for the work that you're doing as an educator, but also as one who has children in Baltimore City Public Schools. I feel this just like a lot of people do. And so one of the things that we know at the end of last year, there were a lot of young people, families who were dealing with challenges with the pandemic. And quite frankly, there were issues with virtual learning. Some of our young people didn't gather all the skills that we would want them to have. And that there was a decision that was made as it related to promotion, right? And so that we weren't necessarily going to hold young people back. Some people got incomplete, some had some additional work to do. And this also kind of coincides with what you mentioned before in terms of these personalized learning plans, this acceleration as opposed to remediation. So I appreciate hearing that language. Can you talk a little bit about what those learning plans look like and how we are looking to get our young people back on track with some of those skills?
Sure thing. And I think part of, why Chief Dabrowski, showed a little corner of the plan, even though I know it's hard to see, is so that we can really demonstrate the kind of conversations that we want to be having with families. So yes, there will be data, right? There will be data that actually show parents, show families, and frankly, show students themselves, kind of this is where the target is for your grade level. This is where you are now. And now let's have a conversation about the ways that you can get that additional time. So for example, as Chief Dabrowski referenced earlier, we had a member of PCAB actually who said, look, my daughter with the virtual tutoring gained 8 to 10 months in terms of her reading level. And I want to know how I can keep up with that. Like I want her to continue to accelerate. So one of the things that we're really working hard to do is to make that information available for families. We also know that a lot of young people had struggled and families struggled during the virtual kind of phase of learning to make sure that their young people actually could connect regularly. So part of the flexibility in the scheduling of the day was to make sure that for some young people, the tutoring happened at the end of the day, so they didn't have to leave and go someplace else. And so we're making some of those adjustments. And part of sitting down with the plans is really to be able to say kind of what are those areas that we want to target, what are the kind of suite of supports that young people need. I was over at Carver the other day on Tuesday, and we had one of the staff members, I think it might be Mr. Collins, I'm going to remember, who I was talking to in the hallway. And one of the things he said to me is, look, Dr. S., a lot of our young people, in order to get to the content, they need to be re-engaged again, right? So they need the sports, they need the arts, they need the mentoring clubs after school. And so a lot of our community partners are coming alongside, because for some of our young people, making up any ground is going to require, that connection piece and that outlet. So what we're really trying to do in these learning plans is to have more of a complete picture of young people, and not just, if this is your reading level, right, you've got to do this, but to really kind of say to families and to young people themselves, this is the variety of options you have, and we're going to keep track of how we're supporting you, what the results are with that, and how we keep on track. I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah,
Sir?
I think it gets there. I think a related part of that, and it kind of goes back to something that Council Vice President Milton mentioned in terms of virtual learning. She mentioned in terms of young people being quarantined. Can you talk about then how that works in terms of the virtual piece, in terms of making sure that young people are still getting the learning if they happen to have to go home?
Gotcha. So meaning while they are in quarantine, how are we making sure that learning is progressing still? Yeah. Gotcha. Now I understand.
No, you answered the first question. This is an addition. So yeah, you were on point. I just wanted to add this other piece. Yes.
No. And you're right. And that definitely is a challenge. I'll invite Chief Dabrowski to expound on that. But one of the things that we're doing is we're using the city's investment, city schools investment. As you know, the City Council was very active in working with the city to get additional funding for technology. And so what that technology investment has done has given us another way for young people to connect to their work, right? And so what's happening now is each school is developing a plan for how young people will not just kind of get the assignments, but will also have touches And by touches, I mean, right, check-ins with teachers. It's one thing to just post an assignment and say, this is the work you missed for 4 or 5 days. That's different than actually having, you know, an educator or a school-based person also check in with that student while they're during quarantine. And so what we've done and what Chief Dabrowski and Chief Davis have really worked on is helping schools develop their plans that actually make sure that young people have both. First, their access to their work, but also access to an adult who can help them through. And you know, I mean, I know as a mom, you know, I've got a daughter working through Algebra 2 now, and if it's just post the assignment, then I'm only going to get so much, right? But that check-in with the teacher, you know, with a professional at the school, with another adult, is a way of that student being able to check in. It's not as perfect as we want it to be, but what we've learned from the technology we've used for the last year and a half is that it gives us another way to connect with students. And you're right, the quarantine is, you know, it's something that we've been working on because, you know, if you're out for 6-7 school days, we don't want young people falling behind during that quarantine period.
Absolutely, and everything you sort of mentioned thus far, you know, speaks to the entire organization, right? So when we think about city schools, you know, we're talking about North Avenue and administration, we're talking about teachers and principals and staff and support. But earlier on tonight, there was a discussion, and I kept hearing the term about organizational excellence. And you talked about key staff. From your perspective, what do we mean by organizational excellence? What does that look like, not only in terms of the operations, but also in terms of the data?
Yeah, I think with regards to organizational excellence in kind of everyday language, the way that I put it is everyone leading from their seat, right? So everyone being able to say, this is the way that we're contributing to the growth and the success of young people. Now, we don't have that uniformly across every school at the high level we want it to be, but that is the target, that is the direction we're moving. And what it says is everybody is vital, right? Everybody has to be part of what that work looks like. And then, yes, we monitor the data to make sure that we're actually moving in the direction, because good intentions and coming together are a good start. But eventually, right, we have to make sure that it's translating in the direction that we want young people to go, which is towards having the skills and the capacities and the experiences to be able to do, you know, what their hopes and dreams are. So it's a combination of, one, using the data to identify what are the students' needs. And again, that's needs across a variety of spectrums. So both academic, social, emotional, mental health, and just interest. Then we mobilize all of the resources that we have. And in some cases, those are community partners. Like some of our best resources to support students with mental health are actually some of our community partners who do a really good job in a lot of those, you know, a lot of those areas. I went by, you know, Uncle T's mentoring program this summer, and he had a group of like 15, 16 young boys, young men with him. And the work he was doing with them was outside of school, but it was in service to these same goals. So part of the coming together has to be within the system. We are organized in a way that we're promoting excellence, but that we're also getting better at leveraging the resources in the community to also come alongside. And I want to give a shout out to the city of Baltimore, because this city stepped up during the 17 months of being out of school. And really, we had people asking all the time, like, how can we support our young people? So I think that it really is a combination of both of those, but what the data does is help us judge, like, what's the impact of all these inputs and how are we organizing all of the resources around this particular student's need, which is what the student learning profile gives us.
Last piece, and I know it'll be over to Council Member Porter, but just as you mentioned those elements, were there certain hiccups or challenges along the way and lessons learned from that kind of got the school system to this point? Because I think that's also the kind of the subtext for some of these issues.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, one of the, I don't know if it's, I mean, I'm assuming it's a hiccup when you have, major pandemic. But one of the things that we saw was that, for example, and Chief High Cupboard is here, like our community school coordinators stepped up in a big and essential and crucial way. Like you can't be talking about getting a young person their homework if you've got somebody in the family who can't go to work and there's no groceries, right? If you don't know how to connect to telehealth in order to get your counseling, right? So part of what our community school coordinators did was, I think, really solidified their role as connector between that. I think we also learned that the more cohesive a school culture is before a major crisis takes hold, the more likely that school community is going to be able to navigate when something like a pandemic or any challenge comes the way. And I think that's part of what drove Chief Davis's work with principals that began in June. We didn't wait until August, 2 weeks before school opened, to say this is important. We learned that from, it was reinforced for like 13 to 15 months of trying to, continue to educate young people. And, to Councilwoman Middleton's point, keep educators connected. Our educators were under great duress. So I think that would be a couple of things I would point out. And I think it speaks to why this emphasis on school culture and this emphasis on personalized learning were the things that we wanted to highlight tonight.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. I also want to recognize, if he hasn't already recognized, Councilmember Glover, and also see Councilman Torrance is with us as well. So with that, I'll adjourn. Thank you. And now to Councilmember Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excuse me. So Dr. Santalese, I actually have a few questions related to the data of the models that you referenced in your presentation. And so first I'll start with, could you share the research data on the acceleration model as represented in the 15 schools? Can you share the value added from those 15 schools, what metrics were used, and lastly, the scalability model for the more than 200 schools that are left to be represented in the city of Baltimore?
Sure. So what we can do is forward to you, Councilwoman. Okay. The research, basically what we used was a lot of the national research, and my colleagues might help me remember. I'm just blanking on the research today, but we can forward that to you. But I think what's most important to know, that part of what drove this was that in that research, and I think it was done with Zern around mathematics and some other areas, the piece that jumped out at us was that overwhelmingly it was Black and brown students who benefited the most from a model of acceleration and not remediation. And what we know in education practice is that actually Black and brown children historically are more likely to be put in remediation, and it doesn't work. And what we saw in Zern was when, as Chief Dabrowski noted in this study, was that when young people had access to what the key learning strands were, they all progressed, but Black and brown children had even greater gains. And there are reasons that I could suppose for that. And I think one is expectation level, that we often in our society expect Black and brown children to have to go back and take things really, really slow, and they can't do it. And what this research showed was that actually what a lot of us already knew, our young people can do it if we get to the essential skills. But we'll make sure we forward that study to you, because that was actually done beyond just Baltimore and beyond just our school communities, but with a number of school communities similar to us across the country. And we'll be happy to forward that to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Dr. Santalese. I appreciate the acceleration model. I was actually one of those students that they pushed back into remediation, and so that's the reason why I'm asking about the success metrics. And lastly, can you just speak through the scalability model? So you mentioned, first starting with 15 schools, and while that may be good, and which is promising, we have many schools in the city of Baltimore. Can you explain your scalability model, how you're prioritizing the most at-risk students versus the most at-risk schools? How are you all doing that? Because one of the things that I want to convey here is that there, and I'm pretty sure that you understand, me and my colleagues understand, there needs to be a sense of urgency here. And I'm sure you have a sense of urgency. And so I just want to make sure that we are directing resources, efforts, and money into the things that work and mitigating risk and lessons learned in tandem with moving the ship forward.
No, it's a good question, and it's a good opportunity also for clarification, because I do believe, and my colleagues can assist me on that, that the 15 schools were not just the 15 schools where we were, starting with acceleration. I think it was 15 schools, and Chief Davis can correct me if I'm wrong, that we were going to particularly target making sure we had that expanded behavioral health team, and those were schools that did not previously have those teams. So we'll be building out on the schools that do, but I think to your point, that's why we're expanding to other schools, because we realize not all schools had those teams. And so with the additional federal dollars, part of why we identified those additional 15 was because we said there was need there too. It had not been addressed, and now with additional resources, we would be investing in those schools as well. So a number of schools might not make an official cut, in terms of what the requirements are, but part of what we do is we use our equity mapping to say, where are we in terms of under-resourced schools and under-resourced communities? And are we using that lens when we are making investments in particular communities? So I believe that that's what you're referencing, but like for acceleration, that's all schools. That's not going to just be a subset.
Oh, that's not, okay. So that's all schools. So you can confirm that that acceleration model is already being implemented in how many schools? I just want to quantify for the public.
So what I would say is that all non-charter schools went through that training, and that it's going to take teachers time. I don't think teachers on a dime, but as I was going around during the training and I was asking teachers at high school level, K-8 level, a lot of what I got back was, this is the right thing to do. We're just going to need time to learn how to do it well, which I think is expected for anything. But we got some good response.
Good, thank you so much. And I have one more question, Mr. Chair, if I'm allowed. Thank you. For the young people that graduated during the pandemic, what is the mitigation plan to re-engage these young people? Given that we are in a new school year, has Baltimore City Public Schools engaged these individuals? Can you share any success rate? If there is a low success rate, what is the mitigation plan for BCPSS to utilize public-private partnerships for these individuals?
So with regards to, and I just want to make sure, Councilwoman, that I understood, are you talking about students that did not graduate or students that did graduate?
No, this is actually a follow-up from Chair Bullock's question related to those that are being promoted that might not have had the academic performance to be promoted. And so my larger issue, and this is something that Chair Stokes often talks about, is, the emergent workforce within Baltimore City. We just deployed hundreds of high school seniors throughout the city of Baltimore that necessarily do not have the academic performance or skills in order to survive in the workplace. And so that's the data point that I'm getting at.
Sure. So there's a couple of things, and then you can let me know if I've answered your question. So the first I would say is part of why we had 2 sessions of summer school was because students actually did not have the credit. So it's not as if they were just kind of passed along. They didn't have the credits, and so we expanded the credit bearing opportunities. So the 406 summer graduates were all young people that would not have graduated had we not had the expanded summer offerings. With regards to the challenge we've been working on for a while, which is young people who graduate without the skills they need to do what they want to do. after graduation. Our College and Career Ready office, and actually two members of that office, Dr. Rachel Pfeiffer and Mavis Jackson, who were on earlier. I don't know if they're still on, and if they are, they can talk about it. They've done a heavy lift in the past 2 years, and this was even before the pandemic, with our Navigator Center really reaching out. We have advertisements on transportation in the city to really re-engage those young people and say, if you're having challenges knowing what to do after high school, knowing kind of how to get reconnected with that, that's what that Navigator outreach is. The other piece is we've been working and partnering with Baltimore's Promise, which are various members of the philanthropic community, to really say, for those graduates who might be out there from city schools or who are close to graduating, right, who still don't have their, for example, literacy skills where they need to be. A lot of the Baltimore's Promise work, combined with the city, the Office of Mayor's Office of Family and Children, and city schools, were coming together to really address, Councilwoman, that age band of students, of young people aged 17 to 20, 21, who really in a lot of ways got caught, and what we're trying to do is ramp those skills. So those are some of the initiatives we have in place to really address that challenge, at the same time that we're working on making sure it's not just a through line, right? That we don't, it is a problem now, but we need to address that problem by the work we're doing while they are still in K-12. So we're doing, it's a both and.
Sure. And are you able, after this hearing, to share any success rates for progress thus far, or in expected progress in the future?
Yeah, I think what we can do is get you some data from our College and Career Office about the uptick in numbers of students who are engaging with our Navigator. And I will say Baltimore's Promise has a real undergirding commitment to data. And so even though it's emerging now, it's something we could show you some of the baseline, and then as we proceed. So we can work on getting you that.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Oh, sorry. So now we'll have Councilman Cohen, followed by Councilman Glover.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dr. Santelises, and the entire City Schools team for being here with us tonight. So my question is around mental health, knowing that in this pandemic, really across the country, we see both the physical health impacts and then some lagging indicators around a real mental health crisis, particularly for young people who already experience high degrees of trauma before the pandemic. I heard you mention, I heard in the presentation, increased clinicians, also appreciated the piece about Uncle T, who is really incredible, and some of the outside work that's going on. I know in the City Council, we've been training all of our librarians in trauma-informed care, and Councilmember McCray just passed a bill to bring on a suicide prevention coordinator. Could you talk a little bit more about addressing the really, I think, real needs of students, educators, and potentially families as well around mental health as we hopefully come out of this pandemic and moving forward?
Sure. Thank you, Councilman Cohen. And I will actually ask, I know I spoke a bit about it in some previous questions, but I would invite Chief Davis to talk more about this, as well as if Chief Tina Highcupboard, wants to add anything from the family and community perspective. So Chief Davis?
Yeah, I mean, I would start off by saying that one of the areas of emphasis, we talked a lot about culture and climate in the work we did in the summer, but what we also did was bring school leaders together to talk through what they're doing with their current resources to make sure that the clinicians that are already in the school are working as one, right? When you've got outside partners that come in, when you've got social workers that work directly for Baltimore City Public Schools, there has to be a lot of coordination. I think the second thing is just making sure that our young people are aware as to what's out there. And some of the conversations that I had with students, what I heard too often is they didn't necessarily know who the social worker was or who they could go to with different situations that arise. Usually they go to whoever they trust. We know that. That's what young people do, but they should also know who the professionals are in the building. And so we've tried to make an emphasis to make sure that our clinicians, our counselors are there front and center a lot of times, not just introduced, but in the classrooms. I will tell you that this will continue to be a work in progress. We're not going to be able to snap our fingers, but that kind of coordinated, cohesive way on a school level is really where we started this summer. But then again, we are asking our partners that work with our expanded school behavioral health to kind of increase what they can offer to additional schools. I would say those have been our major points of emphasis. And again, I would make maybe one more tie-in, Councilmember Cohen, with the student learning plan. And I say that because I think what Chief Dabrowski showed was kind of the about me section, right? It's not just about where you are with literacy or math, but it's really how did you fare, and having that conversation early in the year to kind of gauge how each student is doing, both with them individually and then also with the family. So I think we're trying to really take some of our bigger initiatives that really talk about personalization, that talk about where each student is, and then try to mold what they need during the school day.
Thanks, Chief. Bird, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would just offer that we are also really working hard to make sure we are engaging our young folks directly. We are looking at a campus portal as a way to communicate directly to our students. We've been communicating with community and partners and parents and not actually talking to our kids directly. So we're making a shift. We found out that 85% of our kids are actually on campus portal checking their grades. It's a place for us to engage with them and hear back from them to create that two-way communication between us and our students to see how they're doing. We're also hoping to do some revamp around our student government associations to give kids voice and agency within their schools, as well as our youth ambassador program to make sure that kids have opportunity with their teacher lead or a staff lead to really cultivate programs and things at their schools that actually are meaningful to them and create that sense of belonging and connection for our students. I want to just one quick other plug is that we have parent cafes, which are designed for our families' mental health, where parents are being trained to work with other parents around sort of conversations about what they're struggling with, understanding what parenting strategies might be or mental health strategies for parents as well. So I just want to plug that in. We're also putting that in place for our families.
No, I appreciate that. And, you know, one of the things I hear a lot from parents, from students, from families, from teachers, is just the level of stress that people are under. You know, Michelle Obama talks about low-grade depression that I think, you know, many of us have experienced at times during the pandemic, and just the insecurity of it. And so, you know, one thing I would just lift up is the importance of even having conversations in classrooms with young people about mental health and about that it's okay to not be doing okay, and to just sort of normalize it. Because I feel like in so many families, you know, mine included, you know, it's just at times been tough, and the more we can do on that. My second question is sort of an emergency preparedness question. I sincerely hope we do not have to shut down schools again due to Delta, Gamma, Lambda, whatever the next strain of COVID-19 is. But I also feel like as a country, we've been sort of one step behind on this pandemic throughout. And so I'm curious, Dr. Santelises and your team, what is the plan if we start seeing not just, you know, a few young people contracting COVID and then the work there, but if we start seeing real outbreaks in multiple schools, could you talk a little bit about sort of the emergency preparedness plan and what it could look like?
Sure, Councilman. So first, what I would say is we benefit from the experience we've had, right? And so right now, most of the kind of closure levels we've had have been at either the classroom level or the pod level. And so what I would say to that is it really has been then like a switch back to virtual with regards to that. I think if we get into another kind of, COVID or health crisis, version gamma kind of situation, one of the things that we are doing even now, and our new chief technology officer is working tirelessly on, Tommy Jones, is to make sure that all young people have a device, make sure that they have that, so when we need to go to virtual, we can go back to virtual. Now, I'm not foreseeing that, but as you noted, we weren't foreseeing, the pandemic that got us a year and a half ago either. But so while we are really holding to the fact that our safety protocols have allowed us to have in-person learning over the extended time of this pandemic, and to keep our positivity rate low throughout that entire experience, we also know that we do, to your point, need to be prepared. And so one of the best ways that we're preparing is making sure that the technology is in place, making sure that that the teachers, and the good news is, teachers have shown that they can use the technology. They had to do a deep dive into that. And so, if that occasion arises again, and we need to go entirely virtual, we will do so. And that's what we're preparing for. And that's pretty much what we learned how to do as a district over the last year and a half.
Got you. Quick follow-up on that, Mr. Chair, if that's all right.
Really quickly, yes.
Yep. So in a previous hearing, Councilmember Porter had asked about soap, and just curious how we're doing around stocking soap in all of our schools, making sure we've got hygiene and everything that teachers, young people need just to continue to mitigate within our schools.
And that's another thing that we've learned and benefited from within the challenges of the pandemic. Prior to that, as you noted, Councilman, all of that was decentralized to schools. Schools had to kind of work within their own budgets to make that happen. We've centralized that. So now, and I even sometimes get personal emails. I got one the other day from a teacher who said the soap dispenser is down in this bathroom, and I don't have access to soap. And so I immediately got it to Chief Davis and to our Chief Operating Officer, Dr. Lynette Washington, and literally that same day, we had somebody over in that bathroom verifying that we actually had soap there. So that's kind of an outlier way of saying, even if the process breaks down somewhere, what we have said is people can reach out individually. And in that case, it was a teacher. In that case, it wasn't a principal. The way that we've set it up to happen is that the principal can flag, I'm out of soap, right? They no longer have to say, where in my budget can I get soap? Like, we left that in March of 2020, and we have not looked back. So now if a principal knows that they are low on soap, they can call. Dr. Washington has a process by which that gets delivered. And in cases, like I said, and that's what literally I got that email earlier this week, we go out and say, okay, what's the bathroom in question? And how do we make sure that there actually is the product in place that needs to be in place? So it doesn't mean there's never a bathroom that runs out of something, but it does mean we have a far more robust, centralized response to that.
And thank you, Councilman Cohen, for asking that question. I'll say, as a father of two little boys, we know that washing hands is important, and we think about the mask, but also keeping our hands clean is very important in terms of helping to prevent the spread of the pandemic. So glad you asked that. Just want to note for the record, for our great committee staff, Marguerite Curran, again, Councilmember Porter's request for data from the school system as a follow-up. And at this point, turn the chair duties over to Councilmember Porter.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Bullock. So next I'm going to ask questions to Councilmember Glover. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mrs. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Santolisa and the board for coming on. My question is, given that GO students and grade changes have been a part of...
Can you speak a little louder? We can't hear you.
I apologize. Let me turn my volume up a little bit. It was to say that given that GO students and the grades have been a part of the culture here in Baltimore City since I was even a child, what are the steps that you're taking to change the culture? What are you doing as the CEO or the board to hold like principals, administrators, and teachers to integrity and reporting the attendance and the grades in a process of using attendance, grades, and texting metrics, helping hinder the performance of our frontline educator as it pertains to making sure our students have mastered the fundamentals of learning?
Okay, and Councilman, please let me know if I don't answer both parts of your question. The first part, I think I understood. The second part, I'll let you tell me whether I did or did not understand it. So with regards to the first part of the question, what we have done to ensure the integrity of our attendance and our grading is one, we have made sure that we have system-wide regular training for all those responsible for grading, for school leaders, so that there's no confusion about what is an acceptable grading policy or grading practice, because there are times where grades get adjusted, and that's true for every school district or school that I've worked in, be it in Baltimore or another school district. So we've done that training because we wanted to make sure that everyone was clear. I'd say the second thing that we've done is we've put protocols in with regards to how we review those records, how we verify for graduation. The State Department of Education also has a process that is separate from Baltimore City that also verifies those same instances. And I would say, Councilman, what we've done is we have gone deep with allegations when they arise, and I think we have demonstrated that those folks, when they are found out, it sends the signal that it's not tolerated. We work with authorities when necessary to pursue those who deliberately come out to mislead the public, mislead families, and most importantly, to mislead children about their progress. The culture, I've said it before, and I will say it again, Councilman, that I can't be people's personal ethical guide. Individuals, whether they be in government or in a school system, make individual ethical choices every single day. But what we do is we create a culture where we say that that action's not tolerated, and where we do put the time in to make sure that folks are trained, that folks know what the proper way to count students, to assign grades are, and where there is a transgression in those areas, we pursue. And I think it's a combination of support, a combination of accountability, and a combination of clarity of what is acceptable and what is not, and following through on that. Now, your second question, you might need to clarify for me again.
So the second question was just, are we like helping or hindering like the performance of our frontline educators as it pertains to making sure that students master the fundamentals of learning? I mean, we're at times we're not having out, due to the pandemic. I know we had some situations and there's been some challenging situations, but due to the pandemic, I just find that learning, like virtual learning for so many kids has just not been there. It's been hard. It's been hard even for the parents. So my question is like kind of what are we doing to make sure that students really master the fundamentals of learning from those educators that are giving those lessons, virtually?
Yeah, so I think one of the things, Councilman, and if Chief Dabrowski would like to add, she's certainly welcome to, but one of the things I would say on that, Councilman, is part of why we pushed early on to get students back into schools who learn best in a classroom setting. I was at Carver High School this week, and I met a group of teachers and teacher leaders. I think I was on the 3rd floor. And one of the things they said to me was, Dr. S., it is good to be back, because we didn't like virtual learning either. And so one of the reasons why opening safely and getting young people back and educators back where they can be more successful was a priority. The other piece is within our student learning plans. It's part of why you heard references to tutoring. You heard references to where we saw success was when we matched tutors who could simultaneously mentor. Like, more of our tutors actually looked like the students they were tutoring. We had local college students from places like Morgan who were joining with us in that effort. What that enabled us to do was to make faster ground. And so then the question becomes, how do we make sure that we have access to that and those kinds of supports for all families? But Dr. Dabrowski, did you want to add anything?
Sure. The piece I just want to add is that I think the piece around virtual learning is spot on. Most of our students are best served in person. We did, however, recognize there were a small group of students who actually did quite well, and that's what's represented in our virtual learning program. So I do want to name that out as a distinct space where, as part of our commitment to reimagine, the virtual learning program serves as a space for us to be innovative and responsive to a group of students who have actually done quite well in that space. And what can we learn from that going forward to inform all of our work across virtual offerings? But I think, as Dr. Santelises has said, when I'm out visiting schools right now, the energy, the conversations between students that are happening in classrooms right now, we should never underestimate the power of in-person learning. And I think we're seeing that right now for our young people who've come back. And I would say we're seeing also in our teachers who are so excited to be back with their students in person.
Thank you. And to go over to my second question, first of all, Dr. Santelises, thank you for coming over to my district to visit Uncle T. He do have a very, very important role here in our neighborhood when it comes to helping our young people with mental health challenges and things of that nature. So thank you for coming over and visiting his center. I just want to go to say, also noted in your recovery plan was teachers asking for expanded mental health support for the staff. Being a teacher in Baltimore, at times could be very challenging, and dealing with the challenging times that we have right now. But my ask is, what are you doing to boost the morale amongst the staff to invest in their mental health and encourage retention? I see a lot of these things as a key to providing quality education and increasing the integrity in reporting.
No, and again, Councilman, I think it's a great question, and one, excuse me, that we have learned much from and continue to learn directly from teachers. I think, some of what we've cited before is, last summer was the first time that we had extensive time during the professional development schedule for teachers to be able to focus on their own mental health. I remember last June, we had a Juneteenth session that was packed out from teachers who just wanted space to be able to celebrate, to share in ways that feed people's soul and feed people's spirit. I think the other piece does go to how do we have, and I don't know if Chief Grant Skinner is on tonight, but I will say we've also tried to expand the peer groups that we have for teachers. We found that opportunity culture. We have a former Teacher of the Year, LaQuisha Hall, who works with opportunity culture, coaching, supporting other teachers. Sydney Thomas, this year's Teacher of the Year, also works in an opportunity culture school. And one of the things that we are seeing in that data is that when teachers are working to support other teachers through this, it's better support than they could get from me, right? They actually learn more when they have other teachers to share with, where they feel like they don't have the burden of doing everything on them, and that actually takes away or helps to mitigate some of the stress. I don't know, Chief Grant Skinner, if you want to talk about some of the mental health supports for teachers that we have in place.
Sure, thanks, Dr. Santelises. What I would add to what you shared is that we have an employee wellness program in city schools that we launched a couple of years ago in partnership with our union partners called Be Well. And it is brings together with a couple of wellness educators who are fully dedicated to this task within the district to bringing together and coordinating the range of supports we have for our employees' health and wellness. And that includes mental health supports that are available within our health programs, our employee assistance program, which provides free, confidential supports for staff members all across the district who need support with mental health, but also a range of other things. And we've expanded other offerings that are available to our staff through this program, from things like physical health and fitness and mental health and financial literacy and a whole other range of things, so that our staff members have access to sort of more on-demand options available to them for whatever they may be dealing with at work and at home.
Thank you. And I'll be a good steward of time. Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Council. Thank you, Council President Glover. I believe, Mr. Chair, you have a follow-up question?
Yes, this is for Madam CEO. I know they were talking about COVID and protocols, and I just wonder, can you explain to that process? Because I did mention that I have gotten some phone calls about at some of the schools, they felt like the school wasn't doing the CDC guidelines, and I want to know if that happens, what is the process so they can report that? Because that's real important.
No, you're right, Councilman Stokes. It is important, and like I said, there's a variety of channels. Some even do reach me, and I follow up on those. The first piece, what I will do is ask Chief Perkins Cohen to speak to that, and then I think Chief Davis should speak to what the school level accountability is for when CDC guidelines are not in place and where families can go. In addition to, of course, there's always my ombudsman who does take concerns from families. But if we could start with Chief Perkins Cohen, and then Chief Davis, if you could speak to the school level accountability after that, please.
Sure. So I think Education Committee Chair Stokes, you had put in the chat, or I think we have an email for us to people to email if they have health and safety questions. So it's basically health and safety at BCPS. But Melissa, maybe you can add it to the chat so that people know where to put those questions, because people do, to your point, Councilman, people have a lot of questions right now, and if they see something going on, either if they have a question they want to understand how that health and safety provision is implemented in their school, or if they see a concern at their school, they could send an email there so that we can address it. Our health and safety procedures are quite comprehensive. We have a lot of materials communicating it, and I think sometimes the challenge is there's so many materials, it's helping people get the answers they need. So we've set up this dedicated way for people to ask their questions specifically. We're in our schools regularly, and so we've done a lot of training with schools about health and safety measures, and we have put health and safety coordinators in our schools. We do have some turnover with health and safety coordinators, so we're still hiring for those positions. But that's one extra layer we're putting in our schools to just help take some of the burden of all this off schools. Doing in-person learning in a pandemic is a lot of work to do it well, and so we're making sure we're trying to put supports in schools to help our principals do that effectively. And then I'll turn it to John if he wants to talk about accountability at the school level.
Yes, I mean, I can first say that, early on in the pandemic, when we did hear of maybe someone with their mask down or some other type of violation, we go out to the school immediately or have that conversation immediately. because the tone has to be set by all the adults as to what is expected, especially around mask wearing. The truth of the matter is, if you really go back a year and a half or a year ago, people were worried about students not wearing masks. Students have been very, very, very compliant, and we really have seen few issues. But wherever there is something that continues, or if it's with an adult, then the accountability will lie with that principal supervisor, with myself. It can go through the ombudsman. There's a number of different ways that any parent can raise something. Or it will eventually get to me, and we will follow up with the school. And right, if there's repeat incidents, then that's a different story. But for the most part, we haven't gotten to that point.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention that because it wasn't just about masks. It was about the process of, I guess, the principal not following CDC health guidelines. So just want to put that out so those persons who had them concerns, they have somewhere to send that information. I see it's in the chat, so thanks a lot. Madam Chair, back to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Next, we're going to go to Councilman Torrance. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Dr. Santelises, and my esteemed colleagues. My first question is related to the individualized learning plans as well, but I don't see the connection with SST. So I want to know how they relate with each other, because I want to know, and for the public, SST is student support teams. How do we know in these individualized plans, how do we create a structure where the student has that support and continued support and its metrics in place before there's retention?
No, it's a great question, Councilman Torrance. And one of the things that we asked, and we had teachers asking and principals asking as we were developing this, was, how is this different from other plans? I think Chief Dabrowski can talk about how those other plans, like an SST process, kind of come together in this. But I do want to emphasize that this plan is for every student. It's not just for students who might traditionally be queued up through an SST process, either through a behavioral signal or a 504 plan or others, that this literally is for every single student. And I think that's one of the distinguishing characteristics, that it's not kind of a plan to identify what's wrong or a plan to identify a particular educational designation. This plan is like for Sonia, right? Like, what does Sonia like to do? I had one of my own daughter's teachers who, when she knew that Francesca liked art and she was maxing out, and as Councilman Cohen related, probably had some form of mild grade depression. It was the fact that her teacher knew she loved art. She didn't need, she didn't go to therapy. She hadn't engaged, she hadn't experienced trauma. What she needed was somebody who understood she liked art. Art gave her joy, and being able to integrate that love of art actually meant that her social emotional needs were met. Now, there are going to be young people for whom the need is greater, and the need does need to be identified. And in those cases, what the individualized learning plan should do is actually connect to that SST process and those other identifications. But Chief Dabrowski, do you want to add anything to that I might have missed?
I'll just build right from it, Dr. Santelises, to say that plan, should there be a concern, can serve as a wonderful data piece for an SST process. And I think the point that you emphasize, I want to say again, that a student learning plan is for all students. So it's not, I think it's also a place where we're going to celebrate strengths and interests and think about enrichment and acceleration opportunities and advanced opportunities for students. And when there are those students who are needing that extra support and there's concerns that need an SST, that plan is a perfect resource to have at the ready to get that process going. I hope that answers the question.
Like, it doesn't really answer the question for me, because when I think about trauma in our district in more holistic perspective, right? And I ask for the chair's indulgence while I try to explain why I asked that question, right? I have students who are experiencing trauma at home, and then you have the individualized plan and learn more about them, and that creates that empathy. But at some point, how do we make sure, my question is, how do we connect those two, right? Because how do we know when that flag goes up, like, I need to send the student through that process, right? Because I think one of the things that, and I say this because adults have trauma themselves, and this pandemic has showed us that, how do we communicate to our staff and train them so that they know when to send that student to that process, right? Because if I'm not recognizing in my own self as a teacher that I'm depressed or I'm having issues myself, how can I recognize and empathize with a student right away to say that you need help as well, right? So holistically, how do we recognize, how are we training staff to recognize when to initiate that other process, right? Learn from this one thing, but how do we know when to initiate the next process, right? And connect with it.
No, and I think that makes sense. I would offer, Councilman Torrance, that this actually gives us another means to have those identifications, because teachers have always had those flags of kind of when you need to begin a process. Sometimes it's on point, sometimes it's not. To me, the strength of an individualized learning plan is you're not waiting for something to go entirely off the rails. You're not waiting for a young person like the young lady I met in a hallway in a high school the other day who ran out of a class crying and kicking the wall because of frustration. You're not waiting for that to erupt. A lot of that occurs when you're just in conversation. And I would argue that that's part of why we also have advisory, because as someone who, it wasn't Baltimore after a pandemic, but I was in Bed-Stuy, what I can say to you is a lot of times it's in those regular conversations with young people that some of that comes up in ways that we traditionally wait to erupt in classrooms. So for me, I actually think we have, we can always do more training and support of teachers to identify, but I think part of the challenge in the traditional process is we wait for something to explode. We wait for something to be wrong, right? We wait to have a traditional sign, right? That's something, that there's a need, when oftentimes what we see in our schools that do the best job of holding children and holding families is that it's the relationship that says, wait a minute, there's something else here, and I'm not waiting for a kindergartner to kick over a table and try to rush people to then say something's off, right? Or there might be an additional need there. So I actually think that the individualized learning plan gives us a broader net to have conversations, a broader net for families to flag, right? That something might need additional attention in that student's life. Because I would argue we actually have an education system that is too focused on when things blow up and far less focused on how we gain information, knowledge, and wisdom from building strong relationships with young people. And that's what the best teachers do. The best teachers don't wait for a kid to flip out to find out something's wrong. The best teachers know that a child is going through something because they have a relationship with them when they feel safe to share. And I think that this process is allowing and frankly casting a much larger net than traditional processes like SST are designed to do.
Thank you. That's helpful because I think about the first year teacher who may not have ever lived in Baltimore City and asking these questions and how to build that relationship, because the first month is classroom management, building relationships, and learning the students. My next question is related to students that I have in my district who are students who are 17 and 21. And I know we have the Digital Academy, but I want to know what is the next step for those students in re-engaging them? Because I have a number of young men who work at Amazon. And how do we make it flexible for them, given that we know that we can have online options for our students? So what is our have we started building a long-term plan? Because I know you guys had a pilot. Have we thought about a long-term plan? Because at this time, we know after this pandemic, we can do it, and we can do it successfully for some of our students.
No, thank you, Councilman Torrance. And I think that is a lot of the work. that we are engaged in now that's beginning with the virtual academy in the ways that I think Dr. Dabrowski referenced earlier, right? Like we know that the reason why the virtual academy is there is because we know some young people were more successful. So part of what we're doing now is really trying to take some of that learning, excuse me, and begin designing virtual options that will then complement some of the other options I referenced earlier. So, when Councilwoman Porter, when I was referencing the Navigator, right, for 17 to 21-year-olds. So I'm riding on a bus on my way to Amazon. I now have a way to reconnect at that time, right? And also the Baltimore's Promise adult literacy work, because even though I might be working at Amazon, if I'm 18 or 19 and I'm working at Amazon, it's actually harder than if I'm 15, 16, or 17 working for Amazon, because with that, we can actually negotiate, and Chief High Cupboard is working with Amazon now to really try to negotiate more flexible time, because we know, if kids are going to continue to work, we've got to have additional options for them that are more flexible. I would say the most challenging are the young people, as we referenced earlier, who are officially out of school or see themselves as being out of school. And that re-engagement, I think, also needs to include those virtual options. So I would say that's part of the work of the virtual academy. It's the first step in that. But we definitely learned, as you noted, through the pandemic, that this is worthwhile doing it, that we had young people who said, the fact that I could log on, turn my work on, get my work, turn on the video of the class. I actually got more done than when you made me sit there for 6 hours straight. Now, that was a smaller number of students, but it actually was a real number. So I think that's part of what our work is now, is building that out. So ideally, some of those young people, some of those young men that you're referencing in your district, in the next year or two, you should be able to say, look, there's a flyer. Here's some classes you can take to help you get reconnected. And guess what? You can do it on your time. Guess what? It's virtual. And that should be an option that is increasingly more available as we build that out.
Madam Chair, if you may permit me to do one follow-up.
You have a minute, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My last follow-up, Dr. Sensley, is timeline. You say a year or two, right? Because one of the things is I know that we know that Carolyn's coming. We know that additional funding is coming to the district because of ARP. My question is timeline. When will we have that thing ready, right? Because I see urgency, because I have these young men and women in my district who need it right away. And I feel like we're all drinking from a water hose in terms of like COVID. So my question is, where is somewhere tangible? Is it a year? Is it a year or two? Are we trying to do a cohorts or a ramp? Or like, what is the schedule that you guys are thinking? And I'm not holding you to it, just thinking out loud, like, where do we expect and what can we do as a council to support that as well?
So, I will let Dr. Dabrowski jump in. I think, look, we can get back to you with a timeline in terms of what that looks like. I think, though, again, it takes time to do more than just build out kind of, can you zoom in to a class? Like, part of what we're learning through the virtual academy is we now have a cohort of teachers who have the time to develop the actual expertise in what it means to be successful in a virtual space. So I'm more than happy to get back to you later with what that plan and timeline looks like. But to be very honest and straightforward, opening 170 schools post-pandemic, when it's not even post, it's still mid-pandemic, and coming back really has been pretty all-consuming. I think the fact that we have stood up a virtual academy at all, and it's one that we're going to build on, was our first goal, but we're more than happy to circle back with you, Councilman, with a further plan and timeline, particularly now that the committee chair is, has committed to quarterly meetings. We're more than happy to bring that back to you in future meetings. But I don't want to say now that we'll have it in 6 months, because frankly, this year was really getting young people into the virtual academy. and getting those spaces. So that's where we're learning from, but more than happy to report back in a future meeting. And you're definitely free to let us know kind of what timeline you'd like to hear that update.
Thank you, Dr. Santalisa. I just want to add, also adding a tangible thing for me to do as well, and the council to do as well, something that we can support, because we understand, like, though you're not governed, we don't govern you. How can we support you? Because I think that that's where the relationship has to be, is we have this goal, you have this goal, how can we support you tangibly to get there with you?
Great, thank you.
All done, Councilman? All right. Next, we're gonna move to public testimony. For those who have signed in using the computer, please use the raise hand function to indicate that you wish to testify. We will start with you based on the order of the raise hand. Next, we'll go through all of the users who have called into the hearing. Attendees who have called in cannot be identified by name and will be unmuted by the committee staff one by one. You will hear two beeps at the beginning of your testimony. If a caller does not want to provide testimony, they simply need to say that they don't want to provide testimony after the two beeps. If any speaker is inaudible, they will be directed to call back.
Hello.
First, yes. First speaker, Peps, please give your name and proceed. Thank you. You're unmuted. Go ahead. I can identify you as Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I was just making sure you can hear me. First of all, I'm Yolanda Pulley. My organization is called People Empowered by the Struggle. The thing is that we're the organization that's calling for the resignation of Santalisa's, because this is educational homicide. She failed our children virtually. Our children been failed before time. They've been failed during the time, and they're still failing. The thing is when you sit up there and say something about a lot of parents wanted their children in schools versus virtual learning, one, that's a lie. Two, we have a lot of parents that reached out to us. I don't understand how your number is still 79,000 when over 2,000 plus parents have removed their children from the school system and put them in homeschooling because virtual learning was not an option. We reached out and we asked Robert Stokes to mediate a meeting between us and the school board about having community hubs to lower the factor of people taking their children from one community to the next community, riding buses with no face mask on, because I ride past them every day. I see children standing on the bus stop every day with their face mask under their chin, getting on public transportation, riding with public transportation, potential people who have COVID. We wanted to keep them in their communities. Two, when we're talking about the grade changing and the teachers that's being penalized for speaking out against the school board, who now been fired, and because they don't feel like it's right that they're so-called whistleblowers and they're being penalized by having their jobs taken away from them. Another thing is that when we talk about COVID, it's not who's going to get COVID, it's when they're going to get COVID. So when you took that virtual learning piece away from them and closed down that piece that said, hey, we understand where you're coming from. If you don't want to send your children to school, you don't have to. That was not fair to the individuals who wanted to send their children, who did not want their children in. My son is a virtual learner.
Excuse me, Ms. Yolanda. I'm sorry, you have 30 seconds left. Just wanted to give you a time update, ma'am.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That piece need to be put back in. Parents do not want to send their children back into the belly of the beast. So I'm asking you to partner with us to open up these community hubs or to open up virtual learning.
Thank you so much for that value testimony. Marguerite, can we have the next person, please?
Next person is Jason. You're unmuted. Please proceed.
Hear me?
Yes.
Good evening. Good evening. Hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I can hear you, sir.
Okay, I'm sorry. There's a delay. All right, everyone. So I am the Deputy Executive Director of People Empowered by the Struggle, and we are the ones that are calling for the resignation of Dr. Santalise. Earlier today, she was on the Larry Young Morning Show, and one of the things that she stated, they asked her about her accomplishments, and one of the things that she stated was that the reduced number, that she helped to reduce the number of failing schools, and she increased the number of schools in an upward trajectory, but gave no numbers. And we're wondering, what was the number of failing schools, and where are we at now? Where are those numbers at? And what are these upward trajectory schools? Where do we come from, and where are we going in reference to those schools? How many of these schools are in an upward trajectory? Because from what we're understanding is that a lot of these schools are struggling. We're hearing it from the administrators. They're not wanting to come out and be straightforward with the public for whatever reason, retaliation, being scared. But a lot of the information that that's being received to us is that a lot of the schools, especially in the more impoverished community, challenged communities, like for instance, like the Matthew Henson School, for instance, are dealing with some serious challenges within the school system that aren't being addressed. And we're wondering, where are these numbers? What are the metrics? What are the statistical data that shows us where we've been and where are we going in the future?
Excuse me, Mr. Rodriguez, just a warning, you have 30 seconds, sir.
Okay. And so my last statement is with the COVID thing. We have been saying that we should not have rushed to go back to school. We think that one child testing positive that may expose the rest of the system, unfortunately, is a dangerous proposition to families and to those children that may have underlying issues. And then
Mr.
there's
Rodriguez,
also...
thank you so much for your valued testimony. We're going to move to the next person. Thank you, sir. Marguerite, the next person, please.
They give what, a minute, 30, 2 minutes they gave at the most?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. 2-minute testimonies. Yes, sir.
Right. I just want to say this is a dog and pony show. That's all. I'll make my statement.
Thank you, sir.
Call-in user number 1, could you please state your name and proceed?
Sir, if you're muted, we can't hear you. Sir or ma'am.
Okay. This is number 2 call-in user. Please proceed if you would like to testify. No.
Thank you. So that concludes public testimony. I'll turn it back over to the chair of the Education, Youth, and Workforce Committee to provide closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Councilman Bullock for your assistance on this hearing. That concludes the public testimony, but we're going to take a vote, and the reason why we're voting this out of committee is because I will be holding quarterly meetings with the school system to allow for greater opportunity for dialogue with the council, ensure our students and families are being served. So this committee will take a vote. Is there a motion to vote on Council Bill 21-0057, investigative hearing school performance improvement?
So move, Torrance.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Torrance, second by Councilman Glover. Councilman Stokes is a yes. Councilman Bullock, I believe, is on. Paul, is he on the phone? Okay, we'll come back then. Councilman Cohen?
Yes.
Yes. Councilman Glover?
Yes.
It's a yes. Councilwoman Middleton?
Yes.
Councilwoman Porter?
Yes.
Councilman Torrance.
Aye.
Thank you. One moment, we're trying to reach out because Councilman Bullock had to leave and he was on the phone, so we wanted to make sure he get a chance to vote. Thank you. So, hello, I have Councilman Bullock on the phone. Councilman Bullock, we voted out of committee. Everybody's taking their vote now. We want your vote.
Yes, sir. That's a yay.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. The motion passed. The resolution will be placed on second reader on Monday, October the 4th. I want to thank School CEO Santa Lisa, board chair, board members, my council colleagues, my committee members, and the persons that called in about attending this very important meeting. And I'm so glad now we will have more quarterly meetings with the council and the community so we can keep this dialogue going. So thank you, and everyone have a great evening.
Thank you.